Now, I mentioned earlier, Mr. President Henry Kissinger, I would like one baguette. Give me one baguette made of dead babies from France. Who is the Kissinger of France? Jacques Attali, right? He's the brains behind some of the recent presidents of France. And he wrote a really interesting book. Let's fast forward up to 2006. Mr. Attali wrote a book called Brief History of the Future. This is an overlooked global elite book. People forget this guy. They forget that he wrote everything in his book. And the first 4 or 5 chapters are really boring. I'm going to breeze past those, but basically just says, look, all of history is evolving to be a collective, right? In the ancient times, you had these empires. Man came out of muck, soup, whatever. Now we've got these empires, and they've given way to the final empire of global democracy. We hear this term all the way. We're a republic, we're not a democracy. But regardless, as the news clip at the beginning said, this democracy now has to give way to more freedom? No, to a planetary empire. What? A planetary empire? Yes, he says by 2040, he says we're going to have little assistant robots that will be rolling around your house, little bitch bots, bitching you around, doing who knows what, being your companion perhaps, going around grabbing butts, little gross perv robots running everything in your household. Literally says every household will have one of these little bitch bots running around, bossing you around, telling you what to do, telling you to telling you to clean your room, right? Because he won't do it, right? But he's going to teach your kids, and that's what he says. Is these little robots, little bitch bots rolling around, they're going to be preaching and teaching you everything that you'll know about the external world, right? This is beyond Skynet. This is not just, this is like, it's every dystopian story. They picked up the worst elements and said, let's make the mega dystopia, right? Imagine something worse than a Roomba, right? Like a little dictator Roomba, right? And he says these bots are going to control your perception of the external world. All of your education will come through your little house bot, your little coffin apartment bot. He says America has to go away, right? We got to get rid of this stuff. This is the old thing. America's going away. That's old school. America, he says, and all nation states have to be dismantled. Every nation state, every firewall has to be completely dismantled so that the giant global system can come into place, and he calls it a global brain. In fact, he calls it a golem, right? If you remember the mystical story of the golem, this is this creature that can be created and it doesn't have a soul. It's given reality and it's controlled. And he says that the whole world will be like this giant golem brain that everybody's jacked into, right? And that you will get your daily download. And he says slavery will return, right? Yes, slavery will return, but it will be a slavery to the bots and to the giant AI global brain. And he says all of the things that you've seen rolling out in the last decade. Now, remember, he wrote this in 2006, and he says that in the next few years, what you're going to see is the rollout of the importance of the cell phone. And he says that's just one phase, though, right? He says, but because what the cell phone would do would cause everybody to become rootless cosmopolitans. He says the cell phone would make everybody into nomadic losers, where you would no longer be grounded and rooted in anything in terms of your heritage, in terms of your history, in terms of your background, your religious philosophy. He says all that's going to be destroyed by the cell phone. He says, but that's just one phase, you see. That's going to go away. And what will give rise to this global culture will be a global pop culture. Spurts, sports ball, right? All of that will be made global. There'll probably be Hunger Games type stuff on a global scale. He says, he intimates that there will be things like that, like Hunger Games style, death race type stuff going on. And that what that will do is get everybody into a global mindset through the pop culture, through the sports, through the globalized, whatever the new version of Hollywood's going to be, the streaming services or whatever. And he says, we'll even take the churches, this is key, these big World Council churches, New Agey churches. He says, we're going to co-opt all of those into being engines and arms of this global order. Remember, it's a full spectrum dominance plan. So that means every area of life has to be converted over into this big plan. He says, especially the Catholic Church. He says, this one is key because it's so big. He says, we have to turn that into an engine of the global technocratic order. And that would go for the other religions as well, right? I'm not saying that the other religions are exempted. No, it's the subversion of all of the major religions to turn them into engines of this religion. And the greatest of the quotes in this book, now I'm not saying greatest in a good sense, I'm saying greatest in terms of importance, is he says there's a vanguard to this group, and he calls it hyper-democracy. Right. He's talking about the social justice, hyper democracy, radical equalitarianism, right, all this stuff. He says the vanguard of this group are called the transhumanists. So he says on page 260, he says that the transhumanists are a vanguard of the new world order, and they're going to create a universal brotherhood, right? A universal brotherhood. He says among these transhumanists, we could cite Bill and Melinda Gates, Mother Teresa, and many, many, many New Age weirdos, right? So he lists all these different weirdos, and he says by 2100, we'll have all of the world converted over to this thing, right? 2030, 2050, 2100. These are the key actuaried years, right? And by 2100, he says there'll be all mega cities. You'll all have to be, piled into these cities. Have you seen that movie Code 46 with Tim Robbins? You seen this? Right. This movie actually exemplifies what I'm talking about right here. Right. Children of Men, same idea. These films show that the giant mega cities where everybody's forced to live. You can't live on the land anymore. You can't be on the country. You can't be a country bumpkin anymore. Country boys cannot survive in this global order. You got to be moved into the mega cities. He says that will all be in place along with the giant global brain by 2100. That's what's coming. This is future history being written right here. Here's the plan. I'm Jay Dyer of Jay's Analysis.